Hello everybody. Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth have been a bit contentious to say the least. I absolutely adore these games and I want to talk about why. I want to make a defense for Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because the conversation surrounding these games is extremely polarizing. You either have people like myself that love the game, or you have a bunch of people that deride any choice or decision that these games make. And a bunch of people that almost feel as if they've been personally attacked through the sheer existence of Remake and Rebirth. Perhaps this may sound blasphemous to some people, but if they're able to nail the landing for this third game coming out in likely 2027, there's a high chance that I will end up enjoying the remake games more than the original Final Fantasy VII. Let's talk about it. I got into JRPGs rather late in the game, around the year 2015. Final Fantasy 15 was my start, I got into Final Fantasy 14 soon after, and I went back in one summer to beat both Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII, and I fell in love with both games. Particularly 7 because of the world and the aesthetics of the game. But I love the gameplay. I even bred a golden chocobo. It was a ton of fun. And what I think made the original Final Fantasy VII work so well is a combination of one of the best cast of characters of any game I've ever played, alongside some incredible music that still holds up to this day, and a gentle balancing act between the comedic silly moments and the super emotional psychological moments. You pair all of this alongside really good pacing and amazing themes and messaging with an incredible ATB-based combat system, and Final Fantasy VII is understandably one of the most influential games of all time. And a game that, in my opinion, doesn't degrade too much because of how old it is. I still think it holds up even after a recent playthrough that I completed right before Rebirth came out. And when it comes to Remake and Rebirth, quite a few people feel jaded or, what's the word? Bamboozled? Let's go with that. Because they may have gone into it assuming, because this was the intention, that Final Fantasy VII Remake was going to be a retelling of the original story just simply fleshed out. Because Remake was always advertised as simply the Midgar portion of Final Fantasy VII, just expanded on and fleshed out. Lo and behold, when Remake actually came out, over the course of the game, it largely fell in line with the events of the original. However, every now and then these whisper beings would pop up and almost represent the story going in a different direction, but they would always push it back on track. They were mysterious and still largely are. However, the story, and spoilers from here on out, because in order to justify Rebirth and Remake, I kinda have to talk about spoilers. To some degree, I'm going to refrain from a lot of Rebirth spoilers. Mostly spoilers for Remake. Lo and behold, Final Fantasy VII Remake turned out not to be a retelling of the events of the original, but in essence, an actual remake of the story. A chance for not only us the players, but also the characters to change the course of events and prevent the events of the original from transpiring, or at least the eventual ending, which we have now come to learn was the bad ending, pretty much. And all of a sudden, the game culminates with us defeating the concept of destiny itself and fate to change the course of events so that we can break away from the original timeline, those series of events. This would be a hyper-contentious decision, but in my opinion, I side with the opinion of the YouTube channel Jim Sterling on this issue. It's either false advertising if you don't like the decision, or brilliant narrative subversion if you did. I view it as narrative subversion, because I don't think the reveal would have worked or landed nearly as hard if it had been advertised that was the original goal and intention. It's a hyper-polarizing decision, but in my opinion, I think it has a lot of potential. However, I will concede on one issue. It is entirely dependent on what happens in this third game. They have to stick the landing, because if they don't and they mess it up, it will retroactively recontextualize a lot of these scenes to pretty much be far more sour and pessimistic than they should should have been or were for me when I first experienced them. They need to stick this landing because if they don't, it will recontextualize the entire series. But I have been wildly, pleasantly surprised at the writing in both Remake and Rebirth because in my opinion, it is super respectful of the original source material while also understanding what made it so good. For both Remake and Rebirth, most of the events of the original still transpire. Even in Rebirth, this holds true. There are some changes, but largely speaking, the broad brushstroke plot points are hit, but they take their time with each scene, because they have more avenues to convey and flesh out the characters and these individual story moments than they did with the original polygon models of the PS1. The pacing for Final Fantasy VII back in the day worked with that style of game, and it worked with those styles of Final Fantasy. It's why I don't think a 7 remake style or style of remake would work for Final Fantasy VI or 9, because those games, in my opinion, rely on the pacing of the original narrative. 7, however, always felt as if it could be expanded on just a little bit more in certain areas. It didn't need it back in the day, but it would be welcome in my opinion. And that's what Remake and Rebirth are largely doing. Slowing things down, letting these locations and these scenes breathe, and allowing the characterization, the animations, the facial animations specifically, and the character models alongside the expert S-tier voice acting to really flesh out these scenes and these characters and the interpersonal dynamics amongst the party. This, in my opinion, was one of the greatest strengths of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Rebirth, they run with it and do it even more so, and I think the game's better for it. There's also been another complaint about Remake and Rebirth that I want to address right now before I get into the nitty-gritty about the actual gameplay systems in the game. That is that Remake and Rebirth are needlessly confusing in a Nomura style. First of all, the whole Nomura style of writing is contentious to say the least, and it's a whole bag of worms we can unravel if we really want to, but maybe this is a hot take. I don't think Remake and Rebirth are needlessly confusing. They explain and elaborate on what you need to know for each scene. However, Remake and Rebirth, by the nature of the kind of story that it's trying to tell, is mysterious and is supposed to have you confused about certain questions and potential answers at certain key moments, namely the Zack stuff from Rebirth, also the end of Remake. You are meant not to know everything or to understand everything, and that is by design, and I don't think that's a negative. It's a question meant to lure you along for you to try and unravel at that ball of yarn as the game progresses. I think one of Final Fantasy's greatest strong suits is giving the player these questions for them to gnaw on like a bone to a dog throughout the course of the game. It's just here, the story is over the course of 3 complete games, because I don't buy the narrative that these games are incomplete by nature. I don't buy that whatsoever. Both Remake and Rebirth are feature complete in my opinion. Especially Rebirth. There's a ton of content in Rebirth. Like, oh my god. We're gonna get to that in a minute. Walking away from Rebirth at this point, I have a lot of questions, but those questions are by design because they're going to likely get answered in the 3rd game. The different worlds, the White Whispers, all that stuff, yeah, it's confusing because it's meant to. You're not supposed to know this stuff yet. Like, that's by design. For some reason, when a lot of other stories have these moments of mystery where you're supposed to feel mysterious or not know all the answers yet, it's acceptable. But for whatever reason, when it happens in Final Fantasy, some people just completely lose the plot. There will always be some people out there that need absolutely everything spelled out for them, and they can't take context clues. Like, okay, we all consume stories differently, but I don't think that's a valid critique for Remake and Rebirth, in my opinion. Because the games elaborate on what you need to know, and in my opinion, it's blindingly obvious what's supposed to still be mysterious, because it's going to obviously get addressed in the 3rd game. And if it isn't, then yeah, we can then talk about it. But it's like saying, oh, Darth Vader's not a good character after Empire Strikes Back because we don't know who he is. Well, we haven't had Return of the Jedi yet, have we? Same thing with Lord of the Rings and Return of the King. We don't have the ending yet because this is a trilogy. Or like back in the day with the Flood or the Covenant in Halo 2. 2, well, yeah, we still have to wait for Halo 3 to finish the fight. I'm a firm advocate that if you go into a piece of media looking for faults or things to complain about because you're jaded for whatever reason, you will find ample things to complain about or to critique, even if you have to overemphasize the actual fault here, or view something as a problem when it's not a problem to begin with, in my opinion. Remake and Rebirth, and I think this is apparent, are really, really respectful of the original source material. And it's not just in terms of how they convey the original events, but in the new style, it's also in how Remake and Rebirth tell their story. It is overtly Final Fantasy VII. The world is filled with these big locations and these big characters and these big personalities, with a bunch of funny, silly, over-the-top, wacky moments and events and minigames that populate the world to make you care about the world that is at stake, that will be threatened by meteor near the end of the game. It will make you want to care and defend the world, much like Barrett yaps on about at the beginning of both Remake and the original FF7. He wants to defend the planet he loves, and over the course of 7 and Remake and Rebirth, we are shown how colorful and emotional and good this world can be, but also how it's teetering on a knife's edge. 7 has always been about balancing these over-the-top, wacky, silly, 10 out of 10 crazy moments alongside the other 10 out of 10 moments, but for psychological, depressive moments and themes and motifs. The story of Vincent is not a happy one. The backstory for Barrett, or Aerith, or Cloud, or Tifa, or Red 13 aren't happy ones. It's a game about loss and grief and finding yourself, but also rallying to the side of the planet in its hour of need. There's a lot of themes, both political and personal in nature, interwoven in 7, and Remake and Rebirth understand this and, in my opinion, stick the landing and nail it. They nail the vibe of Final Fantasy VII so well, and they're able to convey it in ways that the original couldn't because of the hardware limitations at the time. Exploring the world of Final Fantasy VII in Rebirth is amazing. In Remake, it was aggressively linear and filled with corridors because that was how Midgar was in the original FF7. I think that is a legitimate critique for Remake because in the original game it was only about 5 hours long as opposed to 40 in Remake. However, it is faithful to the original, even in terms of level design. Think about that. And then when you go to Rebirth, it tells the story of the original game that's a world journeying adventure. Where you're going from place to place, learning the locales, learning the specific locations, fleshing out these characters and the backstories of the main party. And that's what Rebirth is. It's that slice, that chapter of Final Fantasy VII, extrapolated and expanded on, fleshed out with love and care, but still respectful of what came before. And I think it's all the better for it, because Rebirth is jam-packed with things to do, just like the original was. But even more so, because in my opinion, Remake and Rebirth of Final Fantasy VII turned up to 11. In Midgar, there wasn't that many side things to do, so in Remake, there's not that many side things to do. There's some, don't get me wrong, you still need to make it a full-price game, with enough content to justify that, but there's still not as much as, say, Rebirth, where more things open up, but if you remember the original FF7, the game truly opens up after the point Rebirth ends. And Rebirth, even in terms of its gameplay, hints at the way that the world navigation will take place in the third game will be. There's so much to it. And not all of it is mandatory, because a lot of the side content is optional, because that's how it was in the original. Some of it, or some of those minigames you have to do, like you did in the original, but you don't have to, like, complete all of them. And that's one of the things where I think a lot of this modern gaming mindset that is kind of infested, not just a lot of people out there, but also myself included. I'm not, like, safe from this criticism. A lot of players nowadays are far too goal-oriented, and we don't allow ourselves time to just simply stop and smell the roses, or to pick and choose what we want to do. A lot of the times we feel that if it's in the game, oh, I have to do it. that's not the case here. Rebirth, in my opinion, has both quantity and quality, but not every side content in Rebirth is something that I want to do or that I want to perfect, like the sit-ups that you can do with Tifa in the Corel region. I think it's a bad minigame that's just annoying. I don't have to do it. You can just skip it. You don't have to go for the master rank. There's nothing that forces you to do that. You can if you want, but you don't have to. And there's a lot of other side content in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that I think is really fun and that I wanted to do. And when I was streaming Rebirth, I wanted to beat the game because I wanted to be able to stop avoiding spoilers. So sometimes I viewed this like side content that the game had on offer, or the minigames, more like filler than just fun activities you can do. And in almost a cosmic coincidence, right after I beat Rebirth on stream, that next day I got really sick. I had to take a few days off of streaming because of it. I was either burning up or I was freezing cold, I was hacking up a lung, it was not a pretty thing. And I hadn't gotten back into World of Warcraft yet, so I wanted a game that I could just like turn my brain off and just kind of play while I had YouTube or something on a second monitor just to relax and unwind while I was being really sick. So I went back to Rebirth. I had already beaten the game. I was going to put it down and be like, yeah, the game's a bunch of ups and downs, but it's really good overall. So I go back though. I'm like, okay, I'll do the rest of the side quests I have available to me. I'll do some of the side content as well. So that's what I do. I clear the maps. Mostly. Of the things to collect, I cleared them all. I did all the side quests, including that one annoying one with the middle manager in the gold saucer, by the way. That one can screw and select my left nut. Mainly because of 3D boxing. We don't need to get into it, though. Look, remember when I said about some minigames not being your cup of tea? 3D boxing is that for me. But beside that, after I did all the quests, I'm like, okay, that was really fun though. I kind of want to spend more time in this world. I'm not ready to say goodbye yet. So what did I do? I'm like, okay, I can go do some of the mini games. I did the dolphin riding and I got pretty good at it. I got the max reward. I did a lot of the challenges, I think the card puzzles for the card game in Rebirth, Queen's Blood, which is really good, by the way. Like, an amazing card game. Like, in my opinion, on the levels of Gwent from The Witcher 3. Like, if they made this a separate client and a full card game for Final Fantasy VII, it would have a healthy population. It's that good. I digress, though. And I just found myself doing a bunch of more side content, including the Proto-Relic stuff with Yojimbo. And I still want to go back and finish that one up because it was really cool and I'm right near the end. And it was insane to me because it's almost like the same change in mindset that I had with Elden Ring, where when I first played it, I was too goal-oriented and I wanted to beat the game, and my enjoyment of the overall experience suffered because of that. When I've gone back to it recently and just saying, okay, I'm going to do everything, I'm going to stop and smell the roses, I'm going to have an enjoyable time with this, now Elden Ring is one of my favorite games of all time. That's happening with Rebirth as well. And it happened because I got sick and I had no goal left to really complete. It was just a bunch of things I chose and wanted to do, and I explored the world. Is Rebirth a perfect game? Absolutely not. There's a lot wrong with it, but it does a lot right. Not every minigame is great, but there's a lot that are, and a lot that you can sink your teeth into and just put in a lot of hours getting good at them because they're fun by themselves. I think the game desperately needs a jump button. What are we doing here? Please just add this thing for the love of Christ. But I think the combat is really good, and I think the way the ATB system works in Rebirth and Remake is an amazing blend between the real-time combat that Final Fantasy has been embracing in recent years, as well as the old ATB systems of old. And I think Rebirth strictly makes the combat far better than it was in Remake, with way better level design, enemy design, boss design, and combat design as well, with the synergy attacks and skills that Rebirth brings into the game alongside baseline parry for everyone, and just making every character more enjoyable to play. Though personally I'm not that big of a fan of Cait Sith or Aerith's playstyle, but I like having Aerith as like a secondary character that I'm not controlling pretty much. But like, that's the thing. If you want to draw up a list of cons or a list of things to complain about, you can do that. But you can choose to focus on that, or you can choose to draw up a list of things to like and appreciate about Remake and Rebirth, and in my opinion, that list is way longer and is far more deserving of recognition than the cons. The cons are there, don't get me wrong, and there's some that I think they need to be addressed for the third game, but I don't think they ruin either experience or represent the evils of modern-day Square Enix or Nomura storytelling or whatever. The game is unabashedly Final Fantasy VII. It embraces that idea and that identity, and it's all the better for it. The character moments are far more resonant and strong and emotional than they were in the original, in my opinion. That's not a knock on the original, it's a testament to how good Remake and Rebirth are, in my opinion. And some detractors will bring up the sales numbers for these games, whatever. I've talked about that before. I just blame them for putting on the PS5 for Rebirth instead of being multi-platform from launch. That's what I blame it on, and also being $70 for Rebirth. Final Fantasy nowadays is not a series like Spider-Man or God of War. It's not going to be that system seller for PlayStation that's going to draw up a lot of sales, even on a console that I'm fairly certain by Sony's own admission is underperforming. And at this point, it's sold less than the PS4 did at that point in time as well. Remake came out on the PS4, which had a large install base at the end of its life cycle, and still sold pretty well, I would add. Pretty much what I'm just talking about here with the sales figures is I don't think they're representative or indicative of the overall quality of these games. More so the environment that Sony and Square Enix put these games in. Because I think these games themselves are really, really, really good. And I swear to God, like half the comments I've gotten about Rebirth since I've started covering it have been from PC players saying, yeah, I'm waiting till it comes to PC. I can't blame them, but I don't want this to descend into like console wars, a PC versus console or whatever. I talk about that enough in my other videos. I want this to be basically me just gushing about Remake and Rebirth, because I think these are really and truly special games. They are amazing. They are not without their faults, their own unique faults at that. I think Remake and Rebirth have faults on either end of the pendulum. Not pendulum, but like seesaw, where one's a little bit too linear, and then the other a little bit too much like a Ubisoft open world checklist of things to do. But even then, the open world is still really good and fun to explore, and there's still a lot of great moments and things to do in that open world. It's great, and Rebirth is putting the third game in such a position to be jam-packed with story moments, character beats, amazing moments, amazing combat things to do as well. And even if they keep the combat the same as it was in Rebirth, that's fine, because the combat in Rebirth is amazing in my opinion. And the music is amazing, and the visuals are great, and the voice acting is stupendous. Final Fantasy VII back in the day had one of my favorite casts of characters of any game ever. Remake and Rebirth has made me appreciate them in a whole new light, in a whole new way, and make me love them more than I ever have before. I think Final Fantasy is pretty awesome. I love Final Fantasy VII, and I love Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I love Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I don't think those things have to be mutually exclusive. Final Fantasy is amazing. It's great. I love it, and I can't wait to see what happens in the third game, because we can choose to be pessimistic, or we can choose to be optimistic, and I think that's more fun. I'd rather theorycraft, I would rather look forward to the third game, and if it sucks and underperforms in terms of the story or whatever, we can talk about that when if it happens. But I don't think they've given me a reason to believe that the third game will be bad in that way. In fact, my main issue is I don't know how they're going to cover everything they kind of have to in the third game. It's going to be one thick boy, I'll tell you that. But they're setting it up to be amazing, and I'm super looking forward to it. And with that, I will call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for bringing the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps channel out and help support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day. Leave a comment down below with who your favorite character of Final Fantasy VII, whether they come from the original or Remake or Rebirth, is. I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions. I'm partial to Tifa and Barret myself, but also Cloud is one of my favorite RPG MCs of all time. I love these characters. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe, have a great day. I'll see you all next time. Bye bye everybody, until we meet again.